This is the spot where the original ferry that William Campbell built in about 1900 crossed the Salmon River. What he was looking for was a place where the current moved steadily from one bank to the other, and also a place without any rapids. So they chose this spot. The ferry was very active until about the 1904-1905 period, when the Thunder Mountain Mine played out and all the excitement about it died away. Then the ferry became just a place where folks who were headed into the backcountry to cross. No more ferries at Campbell's Ferry, but it retained the name to this day. And we call this place simply The Ferry. This place was first settled by a Scottish immigrant by the name of William Campbell, who came here in 1897 with the intention of putting in a garden. But the year after he got here, gold was discovered by the Caswell brothers at Thunder Mountain. And so it set off a real rush of people. So the folks in North Idaho, up in Lewiston, Grangeville, Elk City, they put together $3,000 and paid William Campbell to build a trail from here to the Thunder Mountain Mine. So William, who thought he was going to be a vegetable grower, all of a sudden was a rich man. And he had the opportunity to put a ferry in.
And he charged $1 a head of stock, 50 cents a person, and 25 cents for a dog to cross the Salmon River.
And when he went to the mine to get paid, he took a check instead of gold to head back this way and got lost in a snowstorm at the head of Lodgepole Creek. He disappeared, was never seen again. The check was never cashed. So he was just the first of many people that came to this beautiful spot here in the Salmon River Canyon with the intention of making a go of it, and then paid a terrible price for trying to do it. So this is what we call a cook cabin. It was built by Warren Cook in 1905. Warren came in here with his wife, Rose. Soon after their arrival, the cabin that they were living in, the one originally built by William Campbell, burned. So they set a tent up in the barn and set out to build another cabin. That was in 1905, and it's standing here behind us today.
When you come up into a place like this and you look out, it's so beautiful, all this beautiful wilderness and green, and it just seems like an Eden. But then as we did the research, all the people who didn't make it paid the ultimate price for trying to make this place their own.
Rose Aiken Cook and her child died in childbirth. This says fall of 1904. Our research for the book really established it's actually the fall of 1905. You can't tell the story of the pioneers that tried to settle this place without talking about the history of the surrounding lands. And Campbell's Ferry, in a lot of ways, was a witness to the transition in thought that we have about our public lands. It's kind of the edge, it's where we stopped development. We have some of the parts from the old ferry. You're standing, I think, on the old cable. You can see in here we got the old pulleys for the cable. There was a question of whether all this land that was being given to the railroads was being sold. They wondered, when's it going to stop? Is there going to be any public land left? And we came up with this idea of forest reserves, which became the national forest. Later we created what were called primitive areas. Then we passed the Wilderness Act in 1964, established a national wilderness preservation system. You know, Bob Highlands used to make whiskey in here. This is part of an old still system they had. So very much woven into the fabric of American wilderness, what we think is wilderness, is the history of those people who interacted with it and their thoughts about it. So when you come here today and you realize that you're perched on the edge of millions upon millions of acres of wildlands, and here's the bleeding edge of civilization. In 1933, along comes a fellow by the name of Joe Zonmiller. And Joe moved here with his wife, Emma.
In 1938, Emma got on a horse here that bolted, knocked her off. She hit her head. She died a week later. Joe was here by himself. There was a woman, her name was Frances Coyle. Frances was very pretty. She was very vivacious. She was young. She was very skilled.
Joe, doing some trail work for the Forest Service, would occasionally go by Stonebreaker Ranch. And he met Frances. And then the next time Joe came by, he brought an extra horse with him and hired Frances and brought her down here to go to work for him. And a year later, Joe gives her a ring.
She could just charm the birds out of the trees. So she kind of made a big splash when she came into this canyon.
Then in 1956, Frances Zonmiller, using her column, her weekly column in the Idaho County Free Press News, started lobbying and writing to our senators and congressmen for funds for the Forest Service to build a bridge to replace the ferry. She wrote very eloquently about how dangerous the ferry was, how it could only be used a portion of the year, and eventually got Congress to appropriate money to build the pack bridge that we have today, and that went in 1956. It's important to preserve places like this because it represents part of the way that America felt about wild places. So we got the place listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2007. One of the first things we did in 1990 when we got the place was we got some great help from the Idaho Heritage Trust, which gave us a grant that gave us the materials to do a very necessary restoration work on this cabin. If you look at it, you can see that the lower base logs are a lighter color. That's a major effort to redo the foundation of a place like this. And we redid the porch on the place. We also put a new roof on the cold storage building, the meat locker that's on the place. Here they had a bear get in and steal the meat. And so Joe dealt with that, Joe Zonmiller, by this concrete structure. It's been a great partnership, that and the National Register listing. Last year we put a new roof on the place, and we think with some future work on it, this cabin's going to have another 100 years of history.
What I love to think about is how our lives are so much like the people who came before us. I love to think about my grandmothers, my great-grandmothers and grandfathers.
Joe Zonmiller one day walked out of the back room of the cabin and collapsed, dead of a heart attack. In 1962, he was 70 years old. So Frances then was alone, briefly, here. There was actually someone else living on the place at the time. It was a local riverman by the name of Vern Wisner. In 1963, they got married. One of the greatest wedding presents I've ever heard of. Vern gave Frances a little English walnut seedling as a wedding present. In 1963, they got married, and today we have this beautiful 50-year-old English walnut that's the iconic image of Campbell's Ferry today. We need to save the history that tells us about how we got here. And Campbell's Ferry certainly represents that. And there's nothing more iconic to that than this cabin that was built here in 1905. You can't be out here long before you start to hear the folks talking to you.
We do.
You know in your logical mind that it's the wind in the trees or the murmur of the river, but it sure sounds like Joe and Frances saying, "What are you city dudes out here trying to do?" Or then some days when it really feels good, you can almost feel the pat on the back saying, "Good job."
We got the country's deepest river gorge, mountain bluebirds and potatoes galore, sockeye salmon, golden trout. What's the name of the place that I'm talking about? We're north of Utah, south of BC. We got a lot of land for a soul to be free. East of Washington and Oregon too, and we're west of Montana. And wow, oh, 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 people come to visit, they stick around and stay. Oh, when you get to Idaho, you never wanna go.